Before we get started, here's what this series is all about, and while you'll want to listen closely. Over the next 3 parts, we're going to break down the connection between the government's calendar, religious traditions, and what the Bible actually calls the mark of the beast. This first part sets the foundation, understanding what the mark really represents and how it influences the way we worship and live. By the end, you'll see how everyday traditions most people never question may have deeper spiritual roots than we've been taught. Let's begin with part 1 and the Feast of Jeroboam. Hey y'all, Coach Inthefight here, talking about the Feast of Jeroboam, that feast that occurs on the 15th day of the 8th month. In this class, we're going to talk about the few verses that talk about that event. Now, this Jeroboam character, this was, as I remember it, the servant or the servant's son of Solomon or something like that. And he ended up splitting the kingdom, taking who we know as Israel or those other 10 tribes north, while the 2 tribes that we refer to as Judah went south with Solomon's son Rehoboam. But one thing that this Jeroboam did, or maybe even the most significant thing that he did, was to actually cause this kingdom to split, was he had a feast similar to that what we call tabernacles, except he did it in the 8th month. So we're here in 1 Kings chapter 12, and we're going to look at verses 31 through 33, just bringing out the highlights of these festival days. And toward the end of this video, we'll show you how to know when this day actually occurred. Well, let's start here in verse 31. It says, "And he made an house of high places, and made priests of the lowest of the people, which were not of the sons of Levi." Now, this is talking about this Jeroboam character, but there's actually a lot going on in this verse when you think about all that he did. These high places are what we would refer to as today as churches, the church buildings that have the steeples on them, and maybe some have crosses up there, trying to make their place higher than others. It seems like it's the only purpose of the steeple. Well, that's actually what it's doing. It's actually been made into what we know as a high place or a place of worship. Then it says, "And he made priests of the lowest of the people." So this should remind you of kind of like what the Catholics did. Not necessarily that they were the lowest of the people, is that the so-called popes at the time hired priests of their own sort, who they hired who they wanted to be in those priestly positions. But then it goes on to say, which were not of the sons of Levi. Now, this is important and particular to the Bible, because these is who was supposed to be the priests in the first place. It's these sons of Levi, who we refer to as the Levites, or the firstborn males. Matter of fact, let me just look that up right quick. Just to show one verse on it, that's Numbers chapter 3 and verse 41, which says, "And thou shalt take the Levites for me, I am the Lord, instead of all of the firstborn among the children of Israel." So there is a connection, a biblical connection between the firstborn males, or the firstborn of each family, and these priestly positions. So this Jeroboam, he chose otherwise. He chose other people to fill these positions. Then you see right here in verse 32, it says, "And Jeroboam ordained a feast in the 8th month, and on the 15th day of the month, like unto the feast that is in Judah, and he offered upon the altar. So did he in Bethel, sacrificing unto the calves that he had made. And he placed in Bethel the priest of the high places, which he had made." Now, these priests of the high places, this should remind you of Jezebel and her priests. But you see, this Jeroboam, he's actually mimicking the 7th month feast, tabernacles, and he's doing it in the 8th month, and he's doing it intentionally. It's not on accident. He's kind of purposely steering the people away from the Lord's feast. And you see here that he offered upon the altar. Now, anytime you hear that being talked about in a negative context, that should always remind you of the abomination of desolation, or that guy we know as Antiochus Epiphanes back there during the Maccabean time. Because, like you see right here, he sacrificed it unto calves that he made, not calves that our father made, but these are creations of his own hands. These are idols that he's making these sacrifices to. And in these places where he's making these offerings, you see he's put these priests that he's hired in and, put them there in these places, in these high places. Then verse 33 says, so he offered upon the altar which he had made in Bethel the 15th day of the 8th month, even in the month which he had devised of his own heart, and ordained a feast unto the children of Israel. And he offered upon the altar and burnt incense. So this is no accident, like we said, he's doing it intentionally. He's created idols. He's hired in these priests, and he's mimicking the feast in the 8th month. Now, what's a little tricky here is where it says the feast unto the children of Israel, because like we mentioned earlier, you had Judah, who is still keeping the other feasts, the other two tribes. This was the biggest split or biggest division. I believe they even went to war over this, was that they were keeping feasts and eating food sacrificed unto idols. Now that we've laid the foundation of what the mark of the beast really means and how it connects to systems of control, we're ready to go a step deeper. In the next section, we compare that same pattern to the holidays we celebrate every year and explain how ancient customs have been rebranded into modern traditions. If you've ever wondered where these holidays really came from and why they're so widespread, this next part will start connecting the dots. Let's get into part 2, and how the Pope deleted our fathers' feast days from their calendar altogether. Hey y'all, Coach in the Fight here, working on the calendar, and came across something really interesting that I wanted to share with you guys. This is how Pope Gregory, whose name in Hebrew gematria equals 666, that same Pope who had a winged dragon for his family crest, the guy who created our modern Gregorian calendar, actually took tabernacles off of it. He actually deleted tabernacles for that year. Let me show you what I mean. We're over here looking at an article on Britannica.com that talks about the modification made to the calendar year 1582. That is the year when the Gregorian calendar went into effect. And what it says here is the most surreal part of implementing the new calendar came in October of 1582, when 10 days were dropped from the calendar to bring in the vernal equinox. It goes on to say that the church had chosen October to avoid skipping any major Christian festivals. And then it says that October 4th, 1582 was directly followed by October 15th. Well, let's look a little closer at those dates. Now, we're over here at a moon calculator where we can punch in the date 1582, particularly September of 1582, and look at when the new moons fell. Now, there was a 0% moon on September the 16th. Of course, that wouldn't have been seen anywhere in the world. And even on September the 17th, it was only 3% illuminated, which means nobody would have seen the new moon that night either. It's only on about September the 18th that they would have saw 1.8% of the moon illuminated, which would have made September the 19th the first day of the 7th month. That would have been the date of Yom Teruah, or the memorial of blowing of trumpets, the first day of the month. But look what day the 15th day falls. The date when tabernacles will occur, it would have started on October the 3rd. And being a week-long celebration, it should have lasted until October the 10th. But when you look at the days that they deleted, they deleted almost the entire week. In other words, there was no October 10th in the year 1582 when Pope Gregory implemented this calendar. So that date, Shemini Asteret, or that great eighth day, was deleted from the calendar altogether for that year. That makes it real odd when it says that the church had chosen October to avoid skipping any major Christian festivals. Well, they skipped probably one of the most important biblical festivals of all time. So the actions of this pope could explain why the pilgrims left the Church of England, fleeing to America in pursuit of religious freedom. We could see this talked about in the article Thanksgiving in America in Wikipedia, how they celebrated the first Thanksgiving in October 1621. This would have been the Feast of Tabernacles. That's why it was a multi-day celebration. It was the biblical harvest celebration of tabernacles that they came to America to celebrate as part of their religious freedom. But that didn't last long, because they immediately fell under the persecution of the American government, including George Washington, who on October the 3rd, 1789, made a proclamation to change tabernacles into Thanksgiving. Looking back at our moon calculator for 1789, we see that there was a 0% moon on September the 19th, with the first possible sighting of the new moon a day later. That means that George Washington made that proclamation the day before tabernacles began. That means that almost at the exact time that tabernacles started, George Washington made a proclamation to change the whole festival to the modern day Thanksgiving. But then when we move ahead to 1863, we see that Abraham Lincoln made a similar proclamation on October the 3rd. And going back to our moon calculator for 1863, we see that that date fell in the middle of the Feast of Tabernacles. But those were only proclamations by presidents. We have to come all the way to 1941 when the U.S. Congress got involved and fixed the date of Thanksgiving to the last Thursday in November. Well, we see that they did that on October the 6th in 1941. Coming back to our moon calculator, we see that there was a 0% moon on the 21st of September. The first possible sighting would have been on the 22nd of September. 2 weeks later, the Feast of Tabernacles would have started on October the 6th. In other words, Congress chose the very first day of Tabernacles to change the date to what we know as Thanksgiving. Do you think all of this is a coincidence? Let me know what you think in the comment section. So far, we've seen how holidays like Christmas and Easter trace back to older belief systems that don't line up with Scripture. But what about Thanksgiving? A holiday most people think is completely harmless and even spiritual. In this final part, Stacy and I uncovered a surprising history behind Thanksgiving, where it actually came from, and why it may not be as neutral as it seems. Stick around, because this section ties everything together and shows how timing, calendars, and worship all connects. Here's part 3, the truth about Thanksgiving. Hey y'all, Coach in the Fight here, guys. Stacy with me.
Shalom.
And today we're talking about how Thanksgiving is the mark of the beast.
Okay.
Now I brought Stacy in because when I told her that Thanksgiving was the mark of the beast, she expressed a little bit of confusion. And being the representative for all of the church ladies around the world,
Okay.
we figured if she's a little bit confused, then there's somebody else that may not understand how these pagan holidays, all of them, are the mark of the beast.
Yeah, I can understand about Christmas, Halloween, Easter, but Thanksgiving is such a neutral holiday. It's sort of just neutral. Everybody is giving thanks, quote, to the Father, and so I'm very interested in finding out how Thanksgiving is the mark.
And I appreciate you expressing how we believe that it was neutral. I too thought it was neutral, but our Father has been working with me on something. Even in a dream, I knew there was something going on, and when I started praying about it, I was led in this direction to look up to see how neutral Thanksgiving actually is, and turns out it's not neutral at all.
When I would ask if it would be okay for us to go up to my grandmother, because we always got the invite to join them for their Thanksgiving dinner, and I think when we first moved back, a couple of times we did, but you would always express that, that's not necessarily something that you wanted to do. And now, lately, for the last few years, we haven't been going, and I just even stopped asking.
Yeah.
There was something about Thanksgiving.
Something about Thanksgiving. Well, in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to look at a little bit of history to show that Thanksgiving is the mark of the beast. All right. So first of all, we're going to look at Thanksgiving in America.
Okay.
Going all the way back to the Pilgrims who first celebrated Thanksgiving here on the United States soil, what we now call the New World.
Yeah, that's the story that we got growing up in school about the Indians and the Pilgrims.
The Indians and the Pilgrims celebrated it together.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Well, the thing about the Pilgrims, we understand that they were coming to the New World because of religious persecution.
Right. Mm-hmm.
In other words, they were wanting to continue their faith. And in order to do so, they felt like they had to come over here on the Mayflower in order to do their feast days or their religion the way they wanted to.
Right.
When we're looking over at this document from Wikipedia on Thanksgiving, we see that the Pilgrims first celebrated Thanksgiving in October of 1621.
Oh, okay.
You're not surprised that it wasn't November?
I am.
Yeah, that's a big deal. And that's going to be the main point of this class, is that they celebrated in October instead of November, because that tells us what Thanksgiving was, what it actually is.
Okay.
We know it was a harvest festival. Mm-hmm. And we already talked about how these people were coming to the New World so that they could celebrate their feast days when they wanted to. Mm-hmm. So as it turns out, what they were celebrating was Tabernacles. The Feast of Tabernacles.
So you're saying that they came over here to celebrate their faith, their feast days, and turned out that the feast days that they were celebrating was Tabernacles. Well, that seems like a good thing.
It absolutely is a good thing. But before we go on and find out why it changed to November, let's have a quick recap on how the sacred calendar works.
Okay.
We can use this to get an understanding of how the sacred calendar works. The beginning of the clock is when the days and the nights are equal, sometime around March the 20th. Mm-hmm. That's when the sun enters what we know as the fourth gate, where it stays there for 30 days. Mm-hmm. And we learn this all from the book of Enoch in his book on the revolutions of the luminaries of heaven. That's in First Enoch. But what we find out is that after the sun enters the fourth gate there in March, it spends 30 days before it goes to the fifth gate, where it spends 30 days, and then it stays 31 days in the sixth gate.
Okay.
That is what we call the spring season. 91 days long. The summer season has the same pattern, 30, 30, and 31 days. making the 91 days of summer before we enter back into gate 3 there at the beginning of fall. The thing about it, you notice that the sun always enters gate 3 sometime around September the 18th.
I see that.
In fact, the first new moon after September the 18th will begin the fall season.
Okay.
That would be the day we know as Yom Teruah, or the memorial of blowing of trumpets. But what's important to note here is how it always starts after September the 18th. So if we can't have Yom Teruah, or the memorial of blowing of trumpets, on an earlier date than September the 18th, that means that the earliest that the first day of the 7th month can fall on September the 18th.
You're saying that the first day has to start on September 18th?
Or after.
Okay.
It cannot start earlier.
Okay.
My point is that the Feast of Tabernacles is always 14 days later. So even if you have the new moon to fall on September the 18th, that means the earliest possible date for the Feast of Tabernacles is October the 3rd.
Right.
So in other words, Tabernacles almost always falls in October.
Okay.
So the reason why they were celebrating the first Thanksgiving, the reason why they was giving thanks in October, they was giving thanks during the harvest festival that we call Tabernacles. That's why it was in October.
Okay.
So in other words, these pilgrims came to the New World so they could celebrate Tabernacles in peace.
Okay.
So these people coming over on the New World had the mark of our Father because they were keeping his feast days in the proper season. In fact, when you look at the Thanksgiving in Canada, they still celebrate it in October.
As of today?
As of today, their Thanksgiving celebrations are in October. The thing about it, back in 1789, George Washington changed the feast day known as Tabernacles here in America. He changed it to Thanksgiving by moving the date from October to November.
Okay. Why did he do that?
You want my opinion on why he did it, or you want to read this document?
We know that he changed it, and it definitely has to do something probably with the Father and him knowing this.
Well, like we talked about earlier, keeping the Feast of Tabernacles puts our Father's mark on the people. But George Washington, being a representation of the beast, would have wanted our Father's mark on the people being the last thing that he needed
Right.
to run a successful government. So he would have changed the date in order that the people wouldn't get that mark on them that they would have normally gotten by keeping the Feast of Tabernacles. So he changed it to November.
Right.
And by doing so, since, like I said, he was a representation of the beast, he took away the mark of our Father for Tabernacles and instilled the mark of the beast for Thanksgiving.
So by changing it from the appointed day in October, he changed it to another day in November, causing us to be under the mark.
Yeah, so people, even till this day, the majority of the people have no idea what Tabernacles is or when it is. Will wait around and celebrate Thanksgiving instead as a replacement, which is the golden calf. Over here in Isaiah chapter 14, if you would, read verse 13.
Okay. For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north.
So this is talking about Lucifer, like we see there in verse 12. This is Lucifer saying that he's going to ascend into heaven and put his throne above the stars of God. And he's going to sit upon the mount of the congregation. But notice this word here where it says mount of the congregation. He's going to set his throne upon the mount of the congregation. Mm-hmm. Thing about it, when we come and we look at the interlinear Bible for Isaiah 14 and 13, down there where it says of the congregation, we see Strong's number 4150, which is talking about Moed.
Okay.
The thing about this word Moed, that's where you hear the word Moedim. Mm-hmm. This is the word used for feast days. So in other words, when you read this verse replacing Mount of the Congregation with Moedim or feast days, what Lucifer was saying that he was going to do was he was going to elevate his throne. He was going to exalt his throne above God by setting it on the feast days. In other words, he was going to set his feast days on top of our Father's feast days, or stamp them out and replace them. Mm-hmm. So that's what's actually going on here when you have the President Washington, replacing tabernacles with Thanksgiving.
Wow.
He has, in the place of Lucifer, I can't even pronounce it, he has stamped out our Father's Feast of Tabernacles, replacing it with his own Feast of Thanksgiving.
I think that's very interesting about how he not only says that he will set his throne above the stars of the Most High, but that he will come in and set his throne up. I guess just wiping out the feast days or having them in such confusion that basically you have wiped them out. Nobody is doing them properly.
This is all an attempt to erase our Father's name altogether. You have people who around the world think they are giving thanks to our Creator, mm-hmm. but in fact are only really giving thanks to the government.
Right. Insincerity.
Or the beast.
You know, it's a lot of people who do not do the holidays participate very wholly in Thanksgiving because, they are thinking that it's neutral and it's not one of those pagan holidays. And so they are giving thanks to who they say, they are giving thanks to the Father. So what do you say about when people say that I'm not doing that, I'm just giving thanks to our Father?
I say, what was you doing on Tabernacles when you were supposed to be?
Right.
And what are you doing on Hanukkah when you're supposed to be giving thanks? Why are you doing it on Thanksgiving? Simply because you're told to? The people give the example, our parents always told us if everybody else was jumping off the cliff, would you jump off the cliff too? But that's exactly what's going on. The world is head over heels for the beasts and the mark of the beast and the golden calf. And so they're celebrating Thanksgiving while the chosen few are keeping tabernacles and Hanukkah. So, like I said, I asked them, where were you at on the correct feast day?
Right. You always say that it comes down to it. It's always about this calendar and it's always about feast days.
It's all about these feast days because that's what gives the mark. That's what marks us as his people. Without keeping the feast days in their proper season, we have to do it on the right day. We can't just do it anytime we want to. By keeping the feast days in the right day, it's when we establish ourselves as his people. If we do it on a different day or if we don't do it at all, we establish ourselves as heathen. That's what it boils down to. Mm-hmm. That's why the Messiah went through all of the feast days talking about that it was an acceptable year of the Lord. And what he did was he taught the disciples the feast days and how to keep them properly, what to do on them, doing away with all of the Jewish traditions and showing them exactly what they were supposed to be doing. Mm-hmm. And when we look, it was in 1942 that the United States Congress designated the fourth Thursday in November as Thanksgiving, solidifying it to that date. So no matter what you think about it, no matter how we feel about it, simply by changing the October Festival of Tabernacles to the November Festival of Thanksgiving sealed it as the mark of the beast. So Thanksgiving is the mark of the beast.
Right.
Guess we'll do another video like this for Christmas.
Yeah.
In the meantime, let's get prepared for Hanukkah and the other festival days, including the Sabbath day, at least for those of us who plan on being counted in that number. That concludes this 3-part discussion on the mark of the beast and how it connects to the holidays we've grown up celebrating. Whether you agree or not, it's worth studying the origins, timing, and meaning behind these traditions for yourself, because what we celebrate and when we celebrate it might reveal more about who we follow than we realize. Now stay tuned for future videos that Stacy and I will put out about Christmas and Hanukkah for more detail. But if you got anything out of this one, hit the like button. If you didn't, hit the dislike button. But make sure you're subscribed anyway, and I'll see you in the comment section. Shalom.